Well, I'm joined now from Liverpool by the Chief Executive of the charity Talking to Minds, Bob Paxman, and former Royal Engineer Lewis McKay, who was discharged with PTSD. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Lewis, if I can speak to you first. You did a tour of Iraq in 2007, another tour in Afghanistan in 2010. It was when you returned from that that you started to display the first signs of PTSD.
That's right, yeah. When I came back from Iraq, I've become very angry, and it didn't take much for me to kind of be on edge and kind of showing this, the early signs and symptoms of PTSD.
Now, despite the fact that for regulars there are those checks on mental health when you return from tour, you weren't identified as suffering from PTSD at this point.
No, because basically what happens is when you come back from an operation tour, whether it be Iraq or Afghanistan, is your regiment, they kind of said to me, if you feel that you've got the signs and symptoms, then come forward and speak to us. But because you don't go through a kind of a screening, you just literally are asked, if you feel you have, and when you come back from a tour, the last thing you want to be doing is going forward and kind of saying, I think I can't hack it. You kind of feel a bit ashamed about it, so you don't go forward to the army, and you kind of you keep it in, and then before you know it, you end up lashing out, and PTSD becomes a lot more serious than what it could have if it was picked up originally from the very beginning.
So, Lewis, what would you like to see happen for people like yourself, for people either in the regulars or indeed in the reserves, which there's going to be a lot more of them? What would you like to see happen after you come home from a tour of somewhere like Afghanistan?
What should happen is as soon as you come off the plane, whether it be in Cyprus for your acclimatisation back to normality, you should go through a non-exemption screening kind of thing with like charities like Talking to Minds, and each individual serviceman is sat down and they're kind of spoken to by the Talking to Minds, and they go through an initial screening, and then again 6 months later the same process again right across the entire board. That's every single person who served on that tour, and then you'll be able to pick up the early signs and symptoms in the initial screening, and then 6 months later you'll be able to pick up the signs and symptoms which are more likely to have obviously kicked in by that time.
Bob Paxman, you run the charity Talking to Minds, which deals with PTSD. I mean, how often are people falling through the cracks, either from the regulars or from the reserves?
Well, there's a lot of people falling through the cracks. The current systems, in many cases, are simply not working, and we're specialising in working with the worst cases, those for which the trauma-focused therapies don't work, basically. And within the NICE guidelines, complex, severe and acute PTSD are not catered for. So we've jumped into the marketplace here, if you like, and we're specialised in working with these guys. And we're seeing a vast amount of people coming, more and more TA guys, because they don't have the restrictions upon them to step forward and actually say that there's something wrong, that there's something going on with them. There's a lot of guys in the military, within the regular forces, that will simply lose their career, they'll lose their position, and in these times of recession and redundancies, there's a high likelihood that they're going to lose their job, so they're not going to come forward and actually declare the fact that they have nightmares and flashbacks and the symptomatology going on.
And Bob, I suppose the point to make about the reserves is if you are starting to experience PTSD, that will happen back when you're in your civilian job. You don't have the regimental support, such as it is, there to pick up the pieces.
Absolutely, and what's happening is the guys are, because they have a second job and they have, if you like, a second family, they're going to people that they know and trust outside of the military, who are encouraging them to step forward and seek help. Outside of the British military medical services, the TA guys are actually coming forward in greater numbers, and that's why the figures are actually higher. It's because they don't have the restriction upon them to keep them quiet and to disguise the fact that they're actually suffering. So they're more likely to step forward and say, look, I've got a bit of a problem here.
Lewis, you've received some treatment from Talking to Minds. I mean, tell us how you are now compared to where you were, well, just a couple of years ago.
I'm a completely different person. Before I received the treatment, I was very on edge. It didn't take much to make me angry. It could be the absolute smallest thing. Before you know it, I'm lashing out. I'm punching doors, punching windows. You know, it's not a very nice place to be. But when you have PTSD, you don't. You sit there and you think, it can't happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And I've just been on operational tour. You know, it's never. You know, you never think it's going to happen to yourself. But until you kind of sit back and really do think about it for a minute, and when people start coming to you and saying, I think you may have PTSD, you know, it's kind of taking that on board and going to the charities like Talking to Minds and receiving the help and treatment that you need.
And with the Afghanistan campaign coming to an end next year, it might be quite some time before we actually understand just how prevalent PTSD is within the armed forces. Bob Paxman and Lewis McKay, thanks both for your time this morning.